Good evening and a very warm welcome to those attending the Major Applications Planning Committee and to our viewers that are watching live on the Council's YouTube channel Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Steve Tuckwell and I am the Chairman of this evening's meeting. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are accessible online underneath the live broadcast. For those present in the room this evening and intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. A reminder to anyone speaking today that your voice will only be audible online if the microphone is switched on. In terms of some domestic arrangements and fire alarms, we are not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm does go off, I would ask that you please follow officers to the fire exits out of the building and to the designated meeting points. For mobile and tablet devices, again for those in the room, please switch off any mobile devices before the meeting starts or put them onto silent. It must be noted that councillors on the committee may use their laptops and tablets during the meeting to review the paperwork. Okay, so that's the sort of logistics and domestic arrangements. I'm now going to do some introductions of those in attendance this evening, for those that are here watching this evening and for those watching online. So I am Councillor Steve Tuckwell as the Chairman. As I said, I'd also like to introduce Councillor Higgins, who's the Vice Chairman, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Cawthorne, Councillor Duncan, who's the Opposition Lead, Councillor Dott and Councillor Yarrow. Those are the voting members this evening. We also have a number of council officers that will be supporting this evening's meeting, notably Mandip Maholtra, our planning officer, our head of planning, James Roger, who sat on my left, our transport advisor, Richard Michalski. We also have our legal advisor this evening, Glenn Egan, and the person who brings this all together for us all is our Democratic Services Officer, Liz Penny, who sat here on my right. Okay, that takes us through the Chairman's announcement and domestic arrangements. We're now going to go into the main body of the agenda. So we'll start with agenda item number 1, apologies for absence, Liz.
No apologies, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 2 this evening is declarations of interest in any matters before this evening's meeting. Any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Agenda item 3 is to receive and agree the minutes of our last meeting, which was the 21st of July. Can I take it that these minutes are agreed? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4 is to notify of any matters in advance or urgent, which there aren't any. And agenda item 5 is to confirm part 1 items in public and part 2 items which are in private. There are no part 2 items this evening, but the agenda will be followed as published. So we will be covering this evening agenda items 6, 7 and agenda items 8 and 9. We'll be having one presentation, but we'll be voting separately on those applications. Okay, right, that brings us now to the main body of this evening's agenda, which is agenda item 6, which is the land at Rainbow Industrial Estate, Trout Road, Useley. And I'd like to hand over to Mandip, who's going to take us through this one.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Agenda item number 6 is land at the Rainbow and Kirby Industrial Estate, which is on Trout Road in Useley. The application site is shown on the screen in red, and the application is proposing a temporary use for 36 months for the installation of 2 porta cabins, the retention of entrance gates, the proposed change of use to a sui generis use, including container storage, open and closed storage of building and scaffolding materials, storage of aggregates, vehicle storage and sales. So there are a multitude of uses proposed or not proposed because the application is actually retrospective. The site has been operational for, we think, approximately 6 months, but forgive me if that's incorrect. So this is a retrospective application and the works are ongoing at the moment. The application has been recommended for refusal as set out on pages 5 and 6 of the committee report. If I take you through some of the proposals, so this is a site which is allocated within our local plan as a mixed-use redevelopment site. So it's the former industrial site. The buildings burnt down some years ago, I believe, which were industrial buildings on the site, and ever since has a checkered history of being used for unauthorised off-airport car parking. It was vacant for a period of time, obviously as a result of COVID. There was less need for off-airport car parking, and as a result, this application is before us to seek a temporary permission for what the appellant or the applicant calls a meanwhile use. We often see meanwhile uses on sites which we're seeking whole-scale redevelopment of, and generally we would support them if they weren't causing such nuisance. So the application before us is recommended for refusal. So if I show you on screen at the moment, there are some areas of closed storage proposed, as existing on site. I believe the site is only 50% operational at the moment. It's not. That was the last known information to us, that the site is only 50% operational. So you may find that some of the nuisance, if it's bad now, it's likely to get worse. There is open storage along the perimeter of the residential occupiers at St Stephen's Road. We then have some aggregate storage, which is alongside the canal. If you'll see from the body of the report, now the Canals and River Trust have not objected in principle to the aggregate storage, which is open storage along the canal side, but they have recommended a number of conditions to prevent impacts on biodiversity along the canal. Now, the applicant has been asked to accept the conditions as requested, and the applicant has flatly said they will not accept the conditions as proposed by the Canals and River Trust. So if you look at condition or reason for refusal number 3, it is primarily saying that as a result of not accepting the conditions, there is likely to be harm to biodiversity along the Grand Union Canal. Now, in an appeal scenario, we may find that the applicant would accept the conditions as proposed by the Canals and Rivers Trust, and that reason for refusal may fall away in the event of an appeal. But I think it was necessary to have it in as a reason for refusal to avoid any ambiguity that the appellant had accepted the principles of what the Canals and River Trust were asking for. In all other respects, the noise assessment has been reviewed and has been deemed to be insufficiently prepared, and for that reason we have reason for refusal number 1. So the impacts on the residential neighbours is of concern. It's also a concern in relation to the canal side moorings and the towpaths. So there are, I believe, leisure users, so they have 2-week residency at a time, and 2 weeks is a fair amount of time to cause a nuisance to anyone using the canal side moorings. Reason for refusal number 2 relates to dust and air quality. So we haven't received sufficient information to assess this. We have notified the applicants that there are concerns raised and additional information is required, and nothing has been forthcoming. Hence the reason that we have reason for refusal number 2 as well. I do want to have, for the purposes of the minutes, note a few verbal updates. We did receive one additional objection to the proposals from a neighbour. It raised no new issues, but it's worth noting for the minutes that there was one new objection, and most of the issues raised related to antisocial behaviour and noise and harm from the development. There's also an amendment I would like to table to reason for refusal number 1 and 2. Now, in reason for refusal number 1, on the third line we refer to "and user of the canal side moorings and towpath." I'd like to change that to users, just to be grammatically correct. And I've actually forgotten to add users of the canal side moorings and towpath into reason for refusal number 2, so I would like that added to reason for refusal number 2. So those are the 2 verbal updates. I will take you through some photographs that we have of the site. Canal side, so you can see that the operations are clearly ongoing and have been in place for some time. Again, we have an informative, I believe, or we should have, saying that we will be passing the matter to enforcement. Yes, we have. Informative number 1. We will be passing the matter to enforcement as a result of the refusal of planning permission. So there is an open enforcement case, however it can't proceed until we've made this recommendation at Planning Committee tonight. So I'll hand back to the Chairman. The application is recommended for refusal.
Okay, thank you for that, Mandip. Right, there's no petition for this, so we've got no speaking rights petitioners or applicant, but we do, I see, have a ward councillor in our presence, Councillor Ahmed Walana. I think you wanted to address the Major Planning Application Committee this evening, so just remind, I know you're well versed in the procedures, but you do have 3 minutes, and when we get to the end of that 3 minutes, I will have to bring you to an end, but I'm sure you've rehearsed it well. So over to yourself, Councillor.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak for the residents of Trout Road, neighbouring flats and St. Stephen's Road on agenda item 6 this evening. This site is situated in the centre of St. Stephen's Road, Trout Road, in the town centre and the Grand Union Canal. It's all residential area. Rainbow is seeking permission to do the business, including change of use, class use, sui generis, storage of materials, vehicle storage and sales for 3 years. Unfortunately, the site is not suitable for this sort of business. There are few reasons. The Trout Road is not suitable for HGV. Heavy vehicles are used for business. The lorries are coming from the high street onto the main junction of Trout Road, Falling Lane and High Street going into narrow Trout Road in a highly populated area. Operating hours, they have ignored the operating hours. They have been operating the business almost 7 days, sometimes from before 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. or midnight. On one recent occasion, a resident rang the council because they were dumping materials at 2 p.m. and the noise was horrendous. You can imagine that people cannot sleep where there is horrendous noise in the surrounding area. There are issues around health and safety. Around the junction, when the lorries are coming from the junction, on right-hand side of the Falling Lane, there is a primary school, Rebs Farm, and on Trout Road, there is a nursery. Then obviously, this part of the road is extremely busy in the morning and in the evening, in the afternoon, when the parents are taking their kids to the school and nursery and coming back to collect them. And there are obviously seriously concerns about the safety of road users, including the pedestrians. It's damaging the local environment. Constantly use of the material, the mixed material, is increased levels of dust in the air. Sometimes it looks like fog in the area. This is damaging the local environment. And also, when they're dumping all the rubbish on the site.
Councillor, your 3 minutes has now run out.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I was quite relaxed. I had got a lot to say.
Yeah, quickly, but unfortunately you've come to the end of your statutory time.
Right,
Thank you.
okay. I urge the committee to refuse this application. Therefore, I welcome the
Councillor,
refusal reasons and agree with the officer's recommendations to refuse this application. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
We got there in the end. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Ahmed Walana. James, did you want to pick up the point that was raised there?
Yes, if I can respond on the highways issue in effect. So the real big problem here is the open nature of the operations. And if you go back in time, clearly it was an industrial site, but the difference is there was buildings and everything was enclosed. In fact, therefore, you didn't have those impacts that are referenced in the refusal reasons in the report. But with respect to the highways, that previous industrial use would be a factor that an inspector would take into account, and it would effectively negate us having a highways refusal reason, because you had basically an industrial estate using all of the areas of highway that are of concern in effect. So it's not me saying that there isn't any highways problems, it's me saying that we can't actually add it as a refusal reason. We could defend at appeal. And so what we've tried to do with the report before you as a committee is put forward reasons we feel we can defend at appeal. And that's why there isn't a highways refusal reason. Obviously, my colleague Richard Castle can give you a detailed technical highways response, but basically the long and short of it is we wouldn't be able to defend a highways refusal reason at appeal.
Thank you, James. As informative as ever. Okay, right, we've heard now from the Ward Councillor, we've heard from James. I'm going to throw it open to debate amongst members. I've got Councillor Higgins, followed by Councillor Dott, followed by Councillor Duncan. So, Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chairman. I noticed the informative about obviously going into enforcement. Are we allowed to add on, it's probably a legal question actually, are we allowed to add on a stop notice so they could have to stop trading as an informative as well, or would that beef it up or not? If not, I would like to propose recommendations with the minor changes of the grammar corrections.
I think Glenn will pick that up, but we're straying into Part 2 territory. So
that would be Part 2 territory, Chairman, definitely. I think if you leave the informative as it is, that leaves the choice of enforcement, should that be appropriate, up to James as delegated officer, taking on board any views that members may express.
okay, right.
That was fine. I just thought that we could beef it up, but...
Okay, thank you. Are you forwarding?
Yes, sorry, I proposed officer recommendation with
Yeah, and
grammar
that's on the
corrections.
basis of the two
Grammar corrections. Yeah.
corrections. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Councillor Dott, followed by Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a land in my ward, Barn Hill. We having the similar sort of business which made the residents' life hell. I won't be surprised if the owner of that land or both lands are same. A couple of days ago, I managed to submit a petition against that business because it's exactly the same business, exactly the same problems my residents having, late night work, early morning work, weekends. Some of my residents, they're facing a mental health issue because they can't get enough sleep because of the business. They can't enjoy their personal life in their own properties. So I can understand where the residents coming from. So I'm happy to second this proposal and for refusal.
Okay, no.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Dott. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. This is a key site in Newsley for redevelopment and something that could really add to the economic life of Newsley, the town centre. And we've spoken about this before in other applications. I believe when we refused the application on B&M for a health centre and residential use because of flooding risks there, this was one of the sites that was identified as being ideal for that kind of use. And of course it would be, because people can arrive by car, by bus, from different parts all around, and if we had a new health centre here, it would be ideal for it. I do have concerns about the roads. There's a very narrow bridge, and I think it has a weight restriction on, and maybe our transport officer could reassure us about that, because I would hate to think of any of the heavy vehicles that might be associated with the kind of storage that could happen on this site. Going over there, I think that there would be issues about that, but I await his advice. Residents in this area are already suffering from dust and pollution, as they are in my own ward, West Drayton to the south, from Hanson's operations, their aggregates, having aggregates delivered to the old coal yard site and onward transmission by lorry. So these residents are caught between two of these activities, and I know from my own residents the sheer hell that this has caused them. So I can't move, I can't second, it's already been done, but I'm very happy to endorse officers' recommendations and my colleagues moving and seconding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Richard, you maybe add a little bit of commentary around the point made around the bridge and vehicles turning left onto the bridge.
Yes, Chair. Certainly it would be anticipated that most of the movements would actually occur from the main high street itself. And as eloquently put forward by James previously, this was already a previous industrial estate, so the roads were exactly the same as they are now, with no change. And the crux of the matter here is that we're not anticipating very large figures, certainly during the peak hours of operation, which is the highway authority's main concern at all times. So we're not talking about very high numbers at all, certainly far less than the mixed-use consent that we had in 2014. So we are in a position, it would be difficult for us to pursue anything further on that with regards to refusal reason.
All right, thank you for that. Right, we've got a couple of other councillors indicating.
Could
Sorry,
you
did you want
just
to come back on
comment
that?
on the bridge, please? Because I think the bridge has a weight restriction, and you only have to look at the bridge to know that it served an industrial uses from a very bygone age for the most part. It is very narrow. It's a humpback bridge and it turns as well. I'm sure members will know this. And I don't think it would be possible. If there was anything blocking Trout Road, this would be the only other access to it. And I think it would be unsafe. That's just a lay opinion.
Do you want to come back
Yes,
on
Chair,
that?
I think the councillor has a valid point. Certainly there's a 7.5 tonne weight limit on that bridge, so not all the vehicles will exceed that. However, I'm just trawling through the conditions that we have here, because what we could do is to try and impose a condition where all... Is that...
It's a refusal, so we're
yeah,
kind
so in other words, if that was the case, yes. So,
Do you want to come in, Mandit, and help us out a little bit here?
So in the planning report, we tried to deal with the eventuality of the appeal. So if you go to the highway section, what we have said is that we've been presented with a transport assessment which has said they will have no more than X number of vehicle movements, which the highways team have assessed and considered does not exceed the worst case scenario from the consented or the former uses. So in the event of an appeal, what Richard Mikowski is suggesting is that we would propose a condition, if the inspector were to allow it, that vehicles could only turn right. We would also impose a condition to say you cannot exceed the number of vehicle movements that you have set out in your transport assessment. We then are in a position, not the greatest of positions, but if an appeal was allowed, we could then monitor and enforce to the benefit of the residents if those vehicle movements were exceeded. But at the moment, we're working on a refusal on the basis of the number of movements that have been declared in the transport assessment being acceptable.
I think that makes quite good, plausible...
It's not the number of movements.
Yeah.
I couldn't care less about... Well, I could care less. No, that's wrong. I do care less about the number of movements because obviously it's densely populated with residents. What I'm talking about is the weight. And that is the key thing. And that's what I think should be included somewhere in one of these reasons for refusal. Because if it is appealed, and if there is an inspector who allows this, to then try and retrieve something without ever having mentioned it as a possible cause of concern, when we know that there are things like, just from the Hanson's yard, just from Asheville Aggregates down the road, that these lorries are pretty, massive lorries. And, we need to make this point. There's a very narrow bridge that cannot be used safely, in my opinion, and I haven't heard anything to the contrary, with some of the very heavy vehicles that would have to use this on occasion, if need be. It's part of the access arrangements.
I think James has got a suggested way forward.
This is actually, I think, a bit simpler than I initially thought. I think we just need an extra informative highlighting that there's the bridge with the weight restriction. Because obviously, as I know members know, it's the decision notice is the most important document that effectively goes to the planning inspector. And so we could, if you're happy to delegate to me, I think that would be a quite simple fifth informative.
I would be happy with that, and at least if it is appealed, it's in the documentation that the inspector would see and know that we had concern about. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you everybody for that. I've got two more councillors, Councillor Yarra, followed by Councillor Cawthorne. Councillor Yarra.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, clearly there are three very good reasons for refusal. There's clearly damage to the living conditions of the residents living in the area and also using the canal side moorings and on the towpath. There's certainly an air quality issue, and I have absolutely no problem in supporting the recommendations for refusal.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Yarrow. Councillor Cawthorne?
Yes, similarly, I support the recommendations. However, just a process question around enforcement. We touched on that a moment ago, and I know we can't talk about stop notices here, but I just really want to be satisfied that officers will take away the requisite authority to act as they see fit in line with their professional judgment, or whether to be an appeal with their hands be tied in that regard. That's just one question. The second thing is, on page 11, second paragraph, external consultees, there's reference to breaches. Do we take it that relates to existing planning such as already exist on site? And is that a separate piece of enforcement that could happen, irrespective of an appeal? Are they linked? Are they separate? I'm not quite sure.
Do you want to pick that, James?
In reality, I'm afraid you as a committee in part 1 can only request in the minutes that you request that the planning enforcement occurs. So that's literally, I'm afraid, all you can do as a planning committee when you're considering a part 1 item is just request something's put in the minutes that you want me as head of planning, in effect, to ensure the planning enforcement team follows something up. But I'm quite happy to say publicly at this meeting that we are definitely going to follow this matter up through the planning enforcement team. But there's not much more, I'm afraid, because we're in part 1, that we can actually discuss.
Did you want to come back on that?
I'll leave it there in that case. I'll pick it up elsewhere. No, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. Right, I'm not seeing any other members indicate. Just a reminder on what we're voting on. Very good debate, by the way. Good scrutiny. We are voting on the officer's recommendation with 2 very slight amendments to refusal item number 1, refusal item number 2, and we've also got the additional formative about the weight on the bridge. So we are moved, we are seconded. Can I take a show of hands, please? So I can confirm tonight officer's recommendation is...
Sorry, do the members... Sorry, do members want something in the minutes requesting that the planning enforcement team follow up? Because that would be the proper way of dealing with all the references to enforcement.
Yeah, Liz will cover that off. That will be recorded in the minutes. So we'll go back to have a vote on this. I think we've all voted. So agenda item 6 this evening is refused. Thank you very much, everybody. Right, that leaves us to go to agenda item 7, which is the Savay Lake, Moorhill Road in Harefield. So, Mandit, back to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Item number 7 is Savay Lake at Moorhill Road. This is a HS2 related application, but not a HS2 application, hence the reason it's at the Major Applications Committee, and I'm presenting it rather than the Specialist Manager, Ian. So HS2 were required as a result of the Act to do their best or make best endeavours to ensure that access by the Angling Club to floating pontoons in this area, which will be severed by virtue of works to the Colne Valley Viaduct, were re-provided for a temporary period. So this application seeks the construction of 3 temporary pedestrian access pontoons with its associated fixings for a limited period of time. So at the moment we have pontoons which will shortly be inaccessible as a result of the construction of the Colne Valley Viaduct. Now I believe that's an application that has either been before us or is coming. I'm really sorry, but I can't recall whether the Colne Valley Viaduct has been here already or not. But this is us seeking permission to try and get the Angling Club sufficient access prior to the severance of the access. So if you look at condition number 1 on page 31, what we have tried to do is, while we would normally give 3 years for HS2 to implement a planning permission, I didn't think that a 3-year permission was relevant in this instance. What we want is really for the implementation of the pontoons to be undertaken prior to the Angling Club losing access to the existing pontoons. So that's why condition 1 is is phrased slightly differently to the normal time limit condition. So if we take a look at the location plan, it's quite a significant portion of the lake that's affected, and we have a general arrangement for the new, I'm not sure if you can even see it, but they're here. the new pontoons are in red. So that's what will be re-provided for the angling club. You'll also note that some of the reasons for approval are slightly different. So condition number 1 makes specific reference to the assurance number from the bill that approved the HS2 works to allow for the temporary installation of these works. That is the primary reason that we're allowing planning permission for this. We are a site which is in the Greenbelt. However, recreational uses within the Greenbelt are encouraged, and for that reason the application has been recommended for approval for the temporary period. You'll note, if you've looked at the background documents to this planning application, they're quite minimal, and there is limited information about the restoration plans once the Colne Valley Viaduct has been completed. So for that reason we have added condition number 2, which seeks a plan from HS2 and their subcontractors Align to provide us with a restoration plan. So we want to see the details of how the land will be restored back to a good condition. I did speak to the specialist manager about biodiversity, and he is clear that you will never get it back to its existing state, but there is insufficient harm as a result of the works that we would recommend refusal, but we can ask for a good condition in terms of restoration. We don't want to leave it too late, so we're giving them sufficient time to implement the works, but we're asking that post-commencement of the development, that within a year we're given that restoration plan, so residents and the local planning authority have assurances about the restoration plan in due course. In all other respects, the application is recommended for approval. It is, I think this is an example of one of the pontoons. So it is a benefit to the application. HS2 were asked to make best endeavours to provide this, so I'm not saying that we're lucky that they have provided it, but we have struggled to get positive dialogue with HS2, so this is a positive outcome for maintaining access to Savay Lake. I will hand back to the Chairman.
Thank you for that, Mandip. Okay, we've got nobody speaking on this one, so we can go straight to the debate amongst members. I've got Councillor Higgins, followed by Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman. My only question, I know that my fellow councillors have got some more questions, so I'll let him answer those. Can we just make sure that the mesh that's on the side of the pontoon doesn't affect wildlife getting caught in it? Apart from that, I will go with put forward Officer Rec. I propose it, so, but I know others want to speak. So, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. In relation to the mesh, Mandip, is there anything we can pick up on that? It's a good point.
I would say rather...
Through you, Chairman, there's various designs that we've been shown there, just gone through that Mandip's just shown. Obviously, they're not the ones that are in place. So we just want to make sure that they're the ones with the metal railings and not the ones with the orange mesh on the side where birds can get caught in. But,
Can I
this
suggest
relates
an
to
add?
condition 7, I think, doesn't it, Mandip?
The ecological clerk of works is something that's independent, hence the reason that we have condition 7 is a compliance one. I think if we're concerned about the proposals for the boundary treatment, we should add a condition asking for that detail. Thank you.
Okay, so we add in another condition to stress that point, and we'll delegate that to you guys to flesh up the wording on that. Okay, thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman. Reference is made to requiring them to be removed after as soon as reasonably practicable. Would it be possible to put a fixed period in? A fixed time limit, should I say? I'm not saying it should be straight away, but say 3 months or 6 months. Otherwise, I could imagine a sort of debate, shall we say, with the applicant about what's reasonable, so to speak. The other question I was going to ask, bearing in mind potentially these will be on site for many, many years. I mean, it's already been said that giving planning permission for 3 years might not be adequate anyway, but assuming these are on site for 5, 6, 7 years maybe, do we need to ensure that there's some sort of, shall we say, maintenance regime put in? Otherwise, you can imagine, you know, they're installed as good as new on day one. A few years down the line, there's a problem, but they have in fact fulfilled their requirement to put them up there, so to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chapman. 2 points there, Mandy. Time limit for when there's no need for the pontoon, I guess, and maintenance.
I think if we deal with the second one first, I think I agree. Now, condition number 4 only requires a site-specific environmental management plan, but it could be changed to be more specific to require maintenance of the pontoons themselves as well. So I think that's a very good point. So we will amend condition 4 to relate to not just environmental management, but also management and maintenance of the pontoons themselves. When we look at the time limit issue, I think back to the issues that we're currently having with the new road into the Southall Gasworks site. So as soon as reasonably practical is probably the most useful definition, because what planning deemed to be ready, when a road is built and you feel like it's ready to be used and isn't being used, you wonder why, and then you realise that actually it's complicated by Highways Act, and with HS2 it will be other issues. So I would push for the current wording as drafted.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm perfectly relaxed about that. I'm happy to defer to the professionals, so to speak. I'm just conscious, as you've said, you've not necessarily got the best dialogue with HS2, so one imagines that removing the pontoons after the event isn't going to be their main core activity, shall we say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Higgins. Do you want to come in, James?
I want to ensure condition 2 is enforceable, which is the crux of the point. I'm just wondering whether it might be better if you delegate authority to me so I can chat with legal colleague after the meeting, and if you're happy for us to agree what we think's the best wording, but so there's clarity over what we're seeking to achieve. It's basically we want it to be enforceable. That's what we're seeking from any changes to the wording. It's an alternative option, but I'm just kind of worried that maybe this is the sort of thing that if we have a longer chat out the meeting, we come up with possibly a stronger wording.
I'm getting a few nods from voting members, but Councillor Higgins, you indicated?
Yeah, I mean, that will do the trick, or we could say 6 months after completion. That is as broad as what you've said, really. But no, I don't trust them as far as I can throw them, so the tighter this is, the better, please. So if you come up with a different type of wording, James, it's fine, but we need to make sure that we actually nail our colours to the mast and make sure that they actually know exactly what we require, rather than being vague. This is something that I'm not going to say any more than that because I'll probably get myself in trouble. But anyway, that's what I think. I think we need to really make sure that we're quite clear on the time limit. As soon as completion, 6 months after completion, I think is a fair comment to make.
So effectively, for that discussion, it's to be as robust as possible, as short as possible, and enforceable.
Yeah. That's good. Okay, we've got Councillor Duncan, then Councillor Chapman again. So Councillor Duncan.
Yes, thank you. I can't really see anything, it's probably me, saying exactly what it's going to look like. And I hope it doesn't look like it does there. I would hope there'd be something that would blend in a bit more. That looks like we've had a major disaster in the area, you know?
Chemical spill.
Yeah, that's right. Don't come here, you know. Can't we have something, more sort of rustic and, angling is a peaceful sort of occupation, I mean, it doesn't really blend in with the green belt or the environment or the activity, to my way of thinking. It looks like something, you know, that's happened after a narrow bridge has fallen down because of a heavy vehicle causing that. But, you know, on a serious note, we do want it to look, if it's, oh, sorry. We do want it to fit in, particularly if it's going to be there for some years.
So, yeah, can we do anything on colour schemes to blend in as it's in the green belt?
I would say that by adding the condition about finding details of the meshing, which is the main area that you will see above ground, that should alleviate that concern. So we can add the reason should relate to biodiversity, so avoiding harm to birds, but we can also add design reasons and impact on the green belt. So the policies can make reference to it needing to be beautiful.
Well, yeah, needing to fit in with the natural environment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Something similar to what we do with telephone cabinets when we condition those. So, okay, right, I am moved. Councillor Chapman, did you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I was just going to echo what's been said elsewhere, to be honest, Chairman. In terms of the colour and, shall we say, the aesthetics, which is a word I rarely use, but some of the samples shown are a sort of combination of Bailey bridges and railway sleepers sort of thing. So I do think we need to have something that, whatever it is, we can approve of and be comfortable with sort of thing. Just to reiterate what we were saying earlier about the time limits, though, I would use different terminology than Councillor Higgins, but I'm more than happy to delegate that to James and his team. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, we're moved, but we're not seconded. Oh, Councillor Cawthorne, just beat you there, Councillor Duncan. So we're moved and we're seconded. Just to remind members what we're actually going to be voting on. So there's some changes here. So we're going to add a condition for maintenance to make that robust. We're going to add a condition which looks at the mesh and also now the colour scheme to ensure it blends in with its environment. And we're also going to reword condition 2 to make it much firmer and enforceable and as short as possible. But we're going to delegate those to officers on our behalf. So that's what we're going to be voting on. Can I take a vote now, please? All those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous, Liz, yeah? So that's unanimous. Agenda item 7 this evening is approved. Okay, thank you. Right, we now have 2 applications, which, as I said earlier on, we're going to be taking as one presentation, but we are going to be having 2 votes. So, Mandy.
Thank you, Chairman. Agenda item 8 relates to Waterside House on Oxford Road, and that's shown on the plan on screen in front of us. And agenda item 9 is on page 77 and relates to Riverview House on Oxford Road, which is, if I show you on this plan, the second building on this site. So for just to provide some context, this site is the rear of the former Xerox building, which is located on Oxford Road. So it's currently covered in scaffolding and is under construction for its conversion into residential units and its roof extension. So you don't normally see the buildings, the Riverview and Waterside, unless you're along the canal side. But it is a visible site from its canal side frontage. So the applications before us are some of our good old favourites. So it's prior approval to seek construction of 2 additional stories. Now both applications, both buildings, as you can see from this plan, are almost identical formats. So the prior approval before us is to extend both buildings up 2 additional stories, measuring 6.6 metres in height. So that's the maximum height of the extension, to provide 31 new residential units in Riverside and 31 new residential units in Waterside House. So that's 62 units across both applications, so agenda item 8 and agenda item 9. The application can only be assessed against the prior approval principles. Now, just for your information, both Riverview and Waterside House already have prior approval for conversion from offices to residential. That was granted some time ago. So this application would then extend upwards above that prior approval to have additional 2 stories of residential accommodation. So the whole building would in effect have 5 stories of residential accommodation at both Riverview and Waterside House. Now the application is recommended for approval. It has been assessed against the criteria set out in Part 20 of the GPDO. Again, this isn't a full planning application. It's fairly limited in what we can consider, but there are more things that we can consider under this application than the standard prior approval. And that's primarily because when you build upwards, there are concerns about fire safety, maximum building heights, and then also air safeguarding. We do have air safeguarding limits. It's not overly clear in this plan, but we have areas which are highlighted in blue. So we have one up here, which is Denham's air safeguarding area. And this is Northolt's air safeguarding area, and further to the south of the plan is obviously Heathrow Airport's air safeguarding area. Within those areas, prior approval does not apply. So one of the first things that we've done is to clarify, just wanted to clarify that this site is outside of those safeguarding areas, so they can apply for permission for this upward extension. So and on that basis, they have met the criteria under the GPDO, and we are recommending approval, but we are seeking a financial contribution. I did want to make one verbal update about the financial contribution, which is the recommendation for both agenda items. So what we have stated is that we're asking for £20,553 to resurface the footway on either side of the bridge on Oxford Road. I think I have a photograph of it. No, I don't have a photograph of it, sorry. So I'll just point it out on the plan about which bridge we're talking about. We probably all know. It's just up here. So it's the bridge into Uxbridge Town Centre. This would form the primary pedestrian route for future residents into Uxbridge Town Centre. So the money we're securing is to enhance that particular footway. Now the £20,000 that we're asking for will come forward from the first building that becomes occupied. What we didn't want to do was secure half the money from one building and half the money from the other, and then not have enough money to implement the works. So whichever development comes first will provide a single planning obligation of £20,553, which will go towards providing those works. We don't want it in instalments, so only one of those 2 applications will pay the financial contribution. I didn't want us to be under any illusion that we're going to get £40,000 and something in planning obligations. It's a single sum of £20,000 from whichever scheme comes first. The only other verbal update that on these schemes is that we have received no objection from South Bucks Council, which came through a few days ago, and those were that's an additional statutory consultee. Otherwise, the applications are recommended for approval, and I'll hand back to the Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mandy. I think James wanted just to add a few points.
Yeah, just so there is a bit of good news before I get to the bad news. The bit of good news is that fortunately, although we've seen as a borough quite a number of residential to office prior approvals, we haven't had many of these upward extensions that are causing problems, in my view, that's purely my view, in other locations. And that's because within 3 kilometres of a centre point of aerodromes, and we have information on these, so we're confident in terms of the location issues here. You can't do this type of prior approval, and what that means in practice is when you do the 3 kilometres from Heathrow, Northolt and Denham, a sizable part of Hillingdon, you cannot do this prior approval, and for that very reason, you as a committee, this could be the first one of these you've seen, and we possibly, and we certainly haven't seen across the two committees, and Matt is confirming this is actually the first one of these, and that's purely because there's rather limited locations developers can actually do these. But so effectively what we've done is because the prior approval can be applied in this location, obviously developers taking advantage of that, we've sought to we've gone through all the criteria. There is no grounds we can refuse them. We've added all the conditions we feel we can. Mandate's clarified the only other matter, which is the highways, section 106. So we feel we've done as much as we can, basically. Sorry if that doesn't sound more positive. Obviously, these prior approvals, we can't get affordable housing, and we can't get, I won't go through all the things we can't get, but there's things we cannot get that we would with a full planning application. But we've sought to get, in effect, everything that we can, and effectively, I think almost for the public record, effectively your hands are tied on these applications, I'd go as far as saying, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, James, for that. I've got our old friend prior approval is back for some debate, but I've got Councillor Higgins followed by Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Chairman. I had a quick look. I'm sure I saw the fire regulations on here, but because the top half is a new build, are we allowed to insist on sprinklers on that on that? Because I can understand, because they're changing the building to a different construction of what it was before, which is fine, they can do that, but can we make sure that we tighten that area to have the sprinkle system put in to the actual building? Not the whole building, just the new area, because it's, I'm just a bit concerned about that.
There are changes both that have occurred to the London plan, which is obviously part of the overall development plan, and to planning legislation that on full planning applications does allow us to include, to basically consider fire safety. Because this is a prior approval, basically we can't add the condition. Although there is a criteria K, quite simply, and Mandate may be to explain in more detail, it doesn't enable the way it's worded for us to add a condition in this instance. However, changes to the building regulations that have applied in recent years would actually come into play because of the total building height. So I can give some comfort, but I can't.
So we're, through you, Chairman, so we are saying that will be in there somewhere because of the changes that are in there.
I feel confident I can say that the changes that occurred over time to the building regulations, because the total height will be over 18 metres, will capture fire safety and go some way to address the concern you're raising. But unfortunately what I'm saying is, because of the prior approval process, I don't feel we can insert conditions that give the comfort on the planning front.
So through you, Chair, that what we're saying is that we can't put the condition, but because of the height of the buildings, it will just normally trigger itself into the system. Is that what we're saying? Because I don't understand, because we're saying prior approval, which I find, which is fine, which is for the bottom half as far as I'm concerned. The bit on the top is new. That wasn't agreed in prior approval, was it? No. So, this is what, this chicken and egg situation here. And I just think that I don't mind us losing our rights on the thing that's underneath, but we shouldn't be able to lose our rights on the things above.
What I'm sort of saying in simple terms is that my knowledge of building control tells me I can give you a bit of comfort, but I can't do it with my head of planning hat.
And I think the point you made will make sure is loud and clear in the minutes as well, so can be captured. Okay, Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, mine was on exactly the same thing, because it says 18 metres or more in height of the existing building, and it's the 2 stories that take it over the 18 metres. So exactly the same point. But then, and I understand what you said, and thank you for that explanation. But then when we get to condition 4, it says no development should take place until details of all materials and external services, etc., have been submitted and approved in writing. And I thought, what we know now, should we be looking at some of these conditions and beefing them up and saying materials that are only in accordance with you know, British standards or whatever, you know, so that we're actually saying they must be built of, you know, safer, yes, you know, materials that are called to some standard. Because we're starting to see not only, you know, copies which are poorer building materials, but even fake copies of, I know it's straying into another area, which is sort of building control, but if it's part of a planning thing, we're approving this, and we're approving it in accordance with drawings, and those drawings, if they specify materials, or we ask for materials, we want them to be of a certain standard, and I think that can just give an additional sort of safeguard, even if it has to go in as an informative, you know, that it is expected that this will be built to British standards.
James is going to pick that point
The
up.
concern here is if we add conditions or add wording to conditions that doesn't strictly comply with the legislation that relates to prior approvals, that if the developers appeal, we then get an inspector with their red pen, and we end up in a worse position than when we started. That's the fear we have as officers, and that's a factor in why my personal view is one of discouraging for these two applications. Totally comfortable on the on the previous case to sort of beef up conditions, but there's more of a fear here that adverse consequences could arise.
I do understand that, and I do understand that we have to be mindful of that and support you in that. But can you honestly see any inspector coming up and saying, no, it doesn't have to be built to British standards? They'd be lynched by half the sort of cladding, you know, groups in Britain. I mean, look, we're all on the same side here. We all want the same thing. It just isn't in, and I understand that you can't condition it because we're not allowed to condition it. But I think because, and we've discussed it, and as members we have concerns about it being over 18 metres, we do want this to be properly built, properly constructed, but with the right kind of materials as well. And that's, you know, that's part of it. It's not just the materials have got to be right, the construction's got to be right. We can't condition those because of the legislation, but I would hope that we would be able to put something, even if it's in an informative, as I say, and certainly for any future developments that we do get, I hope that we would put in a condition about the quality of materials, because that's part of what we're approving. But I don't know how other people feel about this. But it's just
I mean, there certainly isn't any reason why we can't add an informative that kind of implores or encourages, or whatever the right wording is, the applicant to do their utmost on fire safety, because the total end height is over 18 metres, and the government classifies buildings as over 18 metres as ones that that's their key figure in terms of the threshold where you need to you know, up your ante, if that's the right language, in terms of fire safety.
I mean, it's quite arbitrary, really, isn't it? I mean, are you going to jump out of your, you know, drawing room window, you know, at 14 metres? No, of course you're not, really. I mean, it needs to be safe all the way up, doesn't it? But let's do what we can, is my approach. Thank you.
Okay.
And I'll move the recommendation on this first one, if it's just this first one we're considering.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan.
Thank you.
Councillor Higgins, you had your hand up?
Sorry, it's just, obviously, no development should take place until all materials and external services come to you guys anyway. I mean, obviously, can we have faith in that the system is that you'll be saying that to them anyway? I mean, is it to put British standards in that is that going to be really such a dangerous thing for us to get it through?
I mean, you'd hope that any developer would apply common sense and wouldn't submit a materials discharge that is then 3 months later going to fail building control regulations. That just really wouldn't make sense for any developer, you'd have thought. But certainly, in terms of our informative, we can the building control team are on the same floor as the planning team. You know, Mandy can speak to Anthony, and we can come up with an informative that kind of goes some way to address members' concerns.
I'm just saying, obviously on this one,
just informative.
Yeah, on this one maybe we can't, but going forward, when we have a material condition to put BS and the kite, whatever you want to do on it, surely we don't have to bring it back to full council to get that done. You should be able, officers should be able to do that, shouldn't you?
Did you want to come in on that, Mandy?
I think for major applications, there is obviously, we have the ability to add a fire safety condition in its own right. When it comes to the prior approvals, what we're really doing is making sure that the external appearance is acceptable. So we're trying to comply with, I think it's part E of the GPDO, because in effect part K, which is the fire safety one, doesn't apply. Hence the reason that I think James is saying the most we can do is add an informative to flag that the materials should be in accordance with modern day or the most up-to-date British standards. But condition number 4 relates to appearance rather than fire safety. And I know that's not a nice answer.
Okay, Councillor Duncan, do you want to come back?
Sorry, just to prolong this a bit more, sorry about that. Of course, we have the additional problem of private building control. I mean, if it's coming to us, we know, that people are going to be inspecting it and we're going to get full reports and we can have a lot of confidence in that. But that's not the same with all private building control firms. And for example, in my own road, a house is being built and it's on a corner plot where 2 walls fell down. And residents were really alarmed about this, contacted the council. We did not have involvement in that. They contacted the private building control firm, who were very dismissive about the whole thing and would not address anything. So there are areas where we don't have control. That's going to continue. Those firms are going to continue. That's why I'm trying to approach it from the other angle with, well, let's get safer materials then and try and save people that way.
And we're getting lots of nods from voting members. So I think what we've moved, not quite seconded yet. Councillor Cawthorne, happy to second. Now we're going to have to sort of work our way around this because obviously we've had 2 presentations, but we do need to do 2 votes. So we're going to be now voting on agenda item 8, which we will be adding an informative that looks at the quality of building materials to ensure they are of sufficient safety standards. And that will be delegated to officers to do the wording. So can I have a vote on agenda item 8, please? All those in favour? Councillor Yarrow? Okay, so that's 1 abstention and all those others in favour. So agenda item 8 this evening is approved. Now for agenda item 9, I need to be moved and seconded. Councillor Duncan, you happy to move?
Yes, I'd like to move it and with the same informative, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Cawthorne. So again, with the same informative for agenda item 9 on building materials to sufficient safety standards, can I have a show of hands, please? So again, that's similar, 1 abstention. But agenda item 9 this evening is also approved. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to those watching on the YouTube channel. But thanks to voting members this evening, thanks to officers supporting us this evening. Some very robust debate, I have to say, and I'm sure our residents will be very pleased with the scrutiny that this committee has given to these applications this evening. But on that note, we will end the YouTube broadcast. Thank you very much.